jails.
All right, Gemma, at this moment, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder.
The UK's biggest cases.
Zara Alina was attacked by a stranger in Ilford.
Under arrest for causing death by dangerous driving.
We hear the stories of those who lived through them.
He said he would be able to kill me.
As told by the investigators.
There's no easy way to tell someone that their loved one's been killed.
And those left to pick up the pieces.
My last and my only memory is of my dad in a pool with his own blood.
The big cases. Watch now on BBC iPlayer.
There's hardly any tree cover here. The men are exposed.
Moment.
We don't really want to be part of Russia and everything they're doing. The whole Georgia is against it.
This place is being held up as an example of positive change. It was built in direct response to the Manchester Arena bombing.
I feel so strongly because we are losing staff. We are not giving patients the care that we want to give them.
The BBC News Channel. More than just the headlines.
I'm David Willis in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. A gun attack in central Tel Aviv leaves 1 dead and 4 wounded. Israel blames Palestinian militants. Before that, Israel launched airstrikes on targets in Gaza and southern Lebanon as tensions rise in the region. Russian state media says the American journalist Evan Gershkovich has been formally charged with espionage. The US has yet to confirm the reports. And it's been 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement. We hear from the generation born after that landmark deal about life in Northern Ireland now. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. We start in Israel, where the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has ordered the mobilization of police and army reservists following a car ramming attack in Tel Aviv. 1 person was killed and 5 were injured. The assailant was shot dead. It comes amid escalating tensions between Israel and Palestinian militants following raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem by Israeli riot police earlier this week. Israel blames the Palestinian militant group Hamas for the attacks, and it retaliated overnight with airstrikes on Lebanon and Gaza. Rockets were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel after the raids, the biggest such attack in 17 years. Israel, in turn, responded with airstrikes on the Gaza Strip and southern Lebanon. And hours after the airstrikes, 2 Israeli sisters, who officials say were originally from London, were killed and their mother injured in a gun attack on a car in the West Bank. We should warn you that this report from our Middle East correspondent Lucy Williamson contains some distressing images.
Today, on this quiet road in the occupied West Bank, the marks of another chapter in this conflict. 2 young British-Israeli sisters shot and killed as they headed off on holiday. Their mother taken to hospital is still fighting for her life. Their Israeli car shot through with bullet holes. Police are still searching for the attacker, but Israel's Prime Minister, visiting the scene today, framed it as part of the wider conflict here.
At these moments, our forces are operating in the field in hot pursuit of the terrorists. It is only a matter of time, and not much time, that we will hold them accountable, as we did with all the murderers, without exception, in the last months.
Last night, Israel carried out airstrikes against targets in Gaza, a message to the Palestinian militant group Hamas, blamed for dozens of rocket attacks this week. Israel also struck what it said were Hamas targets in Lebanon. Conflict here can be a tripwire for war with the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. It happened in 2006. But actions on both sides now seem calibrated to avoid that by putting Palestinian militants and not Hezbollah in the spotlight. Israel's military spokesman says the country doesn't want an escalation.
It's a multi-dimensional threat. It's a one organization or one enemy here. And we were focused on our enemy. We don't want to escalate with Hezbollah at this point. And we were focused on Hamas. We were a predominant force here.
What's angered Hamas and others in the region are scenes of Israeli police entering Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem and clashing with Palestinians inside. Since then, Palestinian rockets and Israeli airstrikes have moved from Gaza to Lebanon. Few in this region want wider conflict, but the link between retaliation and escalation isn't always easy to break. Tonight in Tel Aviv, another attack. At least one man is reported to have died when a car rammed into people in the city centre. Details are still coming in. The rituals of Easter, Passover and Ramadan, haunted by the familiar routines of violence and conflict.
And we'll have more on that story a little later in the programme. But we're going to turn now to Russia, where state media is reporting that investigators have formally charged the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich with spying for the United States. No evidence to support the charges has so far been forthcoming, and Mr. Gershkovich denies the accusations. Well, joining me now is Sergei Garashko of the BBC's Russian service. Sergei, you know Evan Gershkovich well. How concerned are you for him right now?
Of course, I'm concerned, as many of other Evan's friends and colleagues, David. Obviously, these are really a difficult situation, and this is disturbing for all people who worked in Russia or who are covering Russia in foreign media, in Russian media as well. This is the first time since the Cold War when a Western journalist is put in Russian prison with accusations of espionage. And in case of Evan Gershkovich, he's now facing 20 years in prison with those charges. There were some, maybe some hopes before this day that the FSB, Russia Security Service, would drop the charges or would reclassify them at anything, would just send Evan out of the country after all this media outcry and pressure on the Russian authorities to release the journalist. But for now, as we see, they are going full scale, so they are going to bring him on trial maybe, which is also going to take a lot of time. So it seems like Evan could spend up to 17 months in Russia, Lefortovo pre-detention center.
It's important, isn't it, to make the point that this is unusual. Westerners have been detained in Russia, most notably, of course, Brittany Griner, but journalists not since the Cold War, I believe. What sort of message does this send, do you think, to foreign correspondents in Moscow?
This is unusual, and as we know, many foreign correspondents who were working in Moscow before Russia started the invasion in February 2022 decided to stay, to keep covering Russia inside, from the country, as many other Russian journalists with Russian passports decided to leave because it was too risky for them to keep their reporting. It was an understanding that maybe Kremlin won't go after foreign journalists as, well, they are writing for foreign foreign media, and they, like Kremlin, does not care that much about what image is drawn in Western media about them. It's already quite grim. But still, there were no cases when they went after foreign journalists before. The worst that could happen before with the foreign journalist was just being sent out of the country, like it has happened with our colleague from BBC, Sarah Rainsford, whose visa has been just revoked and she was forced to leave Moscow after covering Russia for almost 15 years. And now in this case, we see that the consequences for foreign journalists who still work in Russia and still covering it could be far worse.
Sergei Gerashko, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Turning now to the war in Ukraine, and Russia and Turkey have failed to reach agreement on further extending a deal that facilitates Ukrainian grain exports via the Black Sea. The deal was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations last July. It allows Ukraine to continue exporting grain through its Black Sea ports despite a Russian blockade in the region. It is the only significant diplomatic breakthrough between Moscow and Kyiv since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Well, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov travelled to Ankara for talks with Turkish officials, but said afterwards that the terms of the current agreement had not been implemented.
If they do not have the desire to honestly approach what Mr. Guterres proposed and so persistently promoted, well, let them continue to ship the relevant products from Ukraine by land, by river, by rail. They have already created the appropriate logistics that work, and we will work, if necessary, and outside the framework of this initiative.
The BBC's Hugo Bachega had been following the talks from Kyiv, and he told us more.
We're near the expired date of this deal. The Russians complain that they are facing obstacles to the country's exports of fertilizers and grain, and they issue these threats that they are not going to be extending this deal. Obviously, this is a key deal. It was a major diplomatic breakthrough when it was signed last year. It's been extended twice, and for the Ukrainians it's very, very important because it gives the country a hard currency. And obviously the deal was celebrated when it was signed because it helped ease a global food crisis. So obviously this is a deal that is going to expire next month, and I think there is the expectation that hopefully another extension can be agreed with the Russians.
Well, meanwhile, officials from both Russia and Ukraine have been casting doubt over a leak of documents relating to the West's plans to provide aid to Ukraine. A senior Ukrainian official said the leak was all part of a ploy to discredit any potential counter-offensive. And Russia's military bloggers have said that the material can't be trusted. The Pentagon, for its part, has said that it's investigating the matter. Again, here's Hugo Bachega from Kyiv.
The documents in question first appeared as photographs and were posted on social media. They include charts with dates of when weapons are expected to be delivered and also numbers about Ukrainian military units. Now, the BBC hasn't been able to verify the pictures and also the authenticity of these documents. But what is also intriguing is that some of these pictures appear to have been modified. They overstate estimates of Ukrainian military losses and understate numbers of Russian troops killed here in the war. Now, here in Kyiv, Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to President Zelensky, said this apparent leak was part of a disinformation effort by Moscow. And in Russia, military bloggers said this apparent leak could have been part of a Western plot to mislead Russian commanders. Now, this mystery happens as Ukraine is planning a counter-offensive to try to take back territory that's now under occupation. But crucially, this alleged leak did not have details of when and where that might happen.
Hugo Bachega there. Well, we're going to take you back to our top story now, the unrest that we've been seeing in the Middle East. And joining me from Jerusalem is the BBC's Lucy Williamson. Lucy, what more do we know about these recent attacks?
Well, the most recent attack has been the one in Tel Aviv tonight, just a few hours ago. Details are still coming in, but we're told now that at least one man, has been killed in that attack. It was a car ramming attack, we believe, near the beach in Tel Aviv. At least 5, possibly 7 other people were injured, we're told, and there are reports that they are all foreign tourists, so we're waiting for their nationalities now to be confirmed. The police are telling us that one of their officers witnessed the event and actually shot the attacker dead, bringing that attack to a halt. But we've seen some quite dramatic footage tonight of a car overturned in a park near the beach, lots of emergency vehicles, as you'd understand, all gathering at the scene. And the Israeli Prime Minister has said he's calling up reserve forces of the border force and also reserve army units to try and counter terrorist attacks in the country.
Now, at the moment, these attacks are pretty much tit for tat, aren't they? But I suppose there's always the danger of potential miscalculation.
That's right. These sort of tit-for-tat attacks have been happening, have been building for months, particularly in the West Bank. But over the past few days, we've seen a different kind of rhythm play out. When Israeli police entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque here in Jerusalem, because they said Palestinians were trying to barricade themselves inside the mosque, that triggered a lot of anger amongst Palestinians and others in the region. And we saw the start of rocket attacks happening from Palestinian militants in Gaza. We saw Israeli airstrikes in retaliation. Then that spread into Lebanon, and we saw the same thing happening. Israel says Palestinian militants were launching rockets from Lebanon, and we saw airstrikes by Israel there as well. So I think there are a lot of concerns here about the risk of these kinds of incidents spiraling. But at the moment, many in the region say they are keen to try and avoid a wider conflict.
Lucy Williamson, many thanks indeed. The world's largest economy is a mass of contradictions these days, it would seem. Today, the US government released figures which show that wages are rising and unemployment is at a more than 50-year low. Yet the underlying trends, that's the figures that analysts crunch in an attempt to find out what's really going on, continue to show that consumer confidence is low and that what is known as business sentiment is at the sort of level that normally precedes an economic recession. Time then to call on our business correspondent, Samira Hussain. Samira Hussain, we've had a week of economic data, including today's jobs report. What are the takeaways here?
Well, we knew that we were going to see some softening, or that hiring was still going to be strong, but it wasn't going to be as strong as we've seen in the last few months. So for the last 6 months, let's say, we've seen that the U.S. economy has added about 330,000 jobs per month for the last 6 months. This time we saw 236,000 jobs. It's still a really good jobs report, but it is slightly slower and slightly lower in terms of jobs growth than we've seen in the last several months. The unemployment rate has now gone down to 3.5%. Remember, this is all still really historically low. It all translates to a pretty solid labor market in the U.S.
Yet whilst unemployment is falling, wages are increasing, the economy is growing, there's still a prevailing sense of gloom, isn't there? Why is that?
Everyone is really nervous for what's going to happen next. There's all this talk of a possible recession and that growth is slowing down. And if you look at consumer sentiment, I mean, look, you see that people are still buying, but they're starting to pull back just a little bit. And if you look at really big, tech companies, all we've been hearing from them is a lot of layoffs. So there's a real sense that possibly something bad is going to happen right around the horizon. But also remember that we're dealing with at a time in which inflation is really high. So it means it's just gotten so much more expensive to heat your homes, or in this case, air condition your homes, or to even buy food or like basic necessities. And a lot of various levels of government have been trying to bring inflation down, but it still remains pretty high.
So does all this point to another rise in interest rates, do you think, when the Federal Reserve meets again next month?
Well, a lot of these market watchers have been reading their tea leaves, and I think they're all pretty much saying, yeah, we're going to see the U.S. Federal Reserve raise interest rates again. Remember, raising interest rates, it means that it gets more expensive for you to get a mortgage for your home or even to pay credit card debt. Those are interest rates that are impacted by what the Federal Reserve does. So that all makes it more expensive, which hopefully will make people spend a little bit less. And maybe, just maybe, we'll see that the economy will cool down a little bit.
It's a complex picture. Samira Hussain, many thanks for joining us. One of the two Tennessee lawmakers who were expelled from the state House of Representatives last night has told the BBC that he intends to seek re-election. Justin Jones called his removal an attack on democracy. Republicans voted to expel Mr. Jones and his Democratic colleague Justin Pearson for leading a gun control protest in the House chamber a week ago. A third Democrat, Gloria Johnson, narrowly survived the vote. Justin Jones has been telling us about what's happened to him.
I have to leave. They've shut off my ID badge already. So they shut off my access to the building. I had to get another former colleague to let me in. They shut off my email access. And so I'm no longer a legislator. That means that the 78,000 people from District 52 have no representation in the state of Tennessee. 78,000 voters. I represent the most diverse district in the state of Tennessee. I'm here in Nashville, District 52. And now they're left without a voice because of the decision of an extreme Republican supermajority, which is almost completely a white, caucus, expelling the two youngest Black lawmakers because we stood demanding action on gun violence. I think the nation and the world are surprised and should be shocked because what they said is that democracy does not matter in Tennessee. They took a very extreme step. There's only been 3 expulsions in the House in Tennessee history, all involving crimes or unethical behavior. This is the first expulsion for First Amendment activity for a breach of decorum, they said, violating decorum rules.
Well, special elections will be held to fill the seats of both expelled members, meaning that Justin Jones and Justin Pearson will be able to run again and potentially return to their seats. America's Vice President Kamala Harris has announced plans to travel to Nashville to meet the expelled lawmakers and to lend support for tighter gun control measures. It's been 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement. The deal brought an end to years of violence in Northern Ireland, although political tensions and other obstacles still remain. So what does the generation born since the historic deal make of the era of peace that has followed it? Our correspondent Emma Vardy has been finding out.
Northern Ireland's peace generation have grown up in a place unrecognisable from its past. Many people born after the conflict have seen little of the dark times that came before them. We've come to show them some of the TV news archives of the place they call home.
It's hard to believe that that's what life was like and how different it is now.
I still am like, but how did that happen? Why did that happen?
To commemorate and pay tribute to the volunteers of the Irish Republican Army.
The sectarian conflict between Protestant and Catholic communities shaped the lives of previous generations.
Red Hall in the front pistol group.
Republican armed groups carried out a bombing campaign to try to force Northern Ireland to give up its status as part of the UK, and Catholic communities came under attack from loyalists.
Seeing some of the footage of the IRA men, that was so bizarre to me because it's not something I had ever experienced.
In 1998, when once bitter political enemies signed the Good Friday Agreement, it was a major turning point.
There you are.
I think it's an amazing document. The fact that you had so many people just willing to put grudges and even their own popularity aside.
Many may disagree, but I feel that we've came so far in such a short period of time.
Although the conflict is in the past, some sense of division is still passed down.
Well, 25-year-olds today had a vastly different experience growing up in Northern Ireland from their parents. It's clear the so-called peace generation still feel some of the old tensions that live on.
You do get an inherited trauma, that I, as a Catholic, can't go to a Protestant area.
That actually triggers something in you?
Yeah, even though it wouldn't stop me. It's ridiculous, but it's because that's what we've always heard.
Why do those beliefs still exist?
Your community, your family, because they grew up with it.
And although the conflict has shaped large parts of the way Northern Ireland works today, Many young people have had little formal education about their recent history.
I've never learned about the Troubles in my entire, education, like in terms of school. Like I would say I was quite sectarian when I was younger, and that was brought from my family.
So how would you rate the success of the Good Friday Agreement?
I would say it was successful in terms of ending the violence, but we still have segregated housing, we still have segregated schooling. Our politics is still divided.
There's no bombs going off now, do you know what I mean? There's still both sides having a dig at each other.
71.12%.
There's little doubt those who voted for the agreement in 1998 created a better future for their children. But today, Northern Ireland's power-sharing government set up by the Accord often collapses over disputes between the parties. And there are growing questions over whether it's become outdated.
We need to get our government back because they just keep passing it on to their young people.
I just appreciate the benefits that it has brought, but there still is issues.
Can your generation make Northern Ireland a better place?
I hope so, yeah. I think there is potential there for Northern Ireland to be more united.
When political figures mark the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement in the coming days and its legacy, they too will do so in recognition that this isn't the end of the story. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Belfast.
Paul Cattermole, one of the founding members of the British pop group S Club 7, has died at the age of 46. The cause of his death is unknown, but there are said to be no suspicious circumstances. The popular group rose to fame in the late 90s, selling over 10 million albums worldwide. As part of their crossover success, they starred in their own US TV series in Miami, which became popular amongst younger viewers. And before we go, a bit of music, a bit of diplomacy, and a bit of history. The presidents of China and France enjoyed a musical performance in the city of Guangzhou on Friday. It was part of Emmanuel Macron's visit to the country. The ancient Chinese tune that was being played was called High Mountains and Flowing Water, which is a tale about true friendship. Appropriate, perhaps. I'm David Willis. Thanks for watching World News America.
Hello there. Good Friday was a pretty decent one across the country.